Between the early and mid-1900s, a lot of conflicts arose all throughout the world. One of the many conflicts was the Korean War. Conflicts going on prior to the Korean War helped generate the start of the war. During World War II, the Japanese Empire occupied Korea. On August 6, 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on the Japanese Empire, while still keeping with the commitment made to its World War II allies, which were Britain and the United States. Just 2 days later, on August 8th, the attack on the northern part of the Japanese-occupied Korea began. As agreed, the United States, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, halted its troops at the 30th parallel. President Harry S. Truman then ordered the landing of United States troops in the southern part of Korea. With the Japanese surrender admit on August 10th, the United States and Soviet Union agreed to divide Korea at the 30th parallel. The north part of Japanese forces would surrender to the Soviet Union, that to the south would surrender to the United States. In December 1945, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed to temporarily take on the administration of Korea. Concurrently, both countries established governments in their respective halves, each one favorable to their political ideology. The United States ran elections supervised by the United Nations, replacing an indigenous left-wing government that had formed in June 1945, before the end of World War II. This was led by anti-communist Syngman Rhee. The Soviet Union agreed to further the rise of the communist government led by Kim Il Sung in the northern part. In 1949, both the Soviet Union and the United States forces withdrew. The intentions of both South Korean President Syngman Rhee and North Korean General Secretary Kim Il Sung was to reunite the peninsula under their own systems. This is because of the Soviet tanks and heavy arms, which allowed North Koreans to be better prepared to go on the offense in case of a war. South Koreans, however, were not so fortunate. They had limited United States backing, therefore having far fewer options in case of a war. The United States government believed, at the time, that the communist bloc was a unified monolith, and that North Korea acted within this monolith as a pawn of the Soviet Union. Thus, the United States portrayed the conflict in the context of international aggression rather than a civil war. Rhee and Kim competed to reunite the peninsula, conducting military acts along the border throughout 1949 and early 1950. The North Koreans, however, armed with Soviet tanks, changed the nature of a war from a border conflict to a full-blown civil war. In mid-1949, Kim pressed his case with Joseph Stalin, that the time had come for the reunification of the Korean peninsula. Kim needed Soviet support to successfully execute an offense far across a rugged, mountainous peninsula. Stalin, as leader of the communist bloc, refused permission. He was concerned with the relative unpreparedness of the North Korean armed forces, and with the possibility of the United States getting involved in the war. Over the following year, the North Korean leadership shaped the North Korean army into a daunting, offensive war machine. The army was modeled partly on a Soviet mechanized force. However, it was strengthened primarily by an influx of Koreans who had served with the Chinese People's Liberation Army since the 1930s. By 1950, the North Koreans equipped with Soviet weaponry enjoyed substantial advantages over the South in every category of equipment. On June 25, 1950, the North Korean army, with soldier numbers near 75,000, began the war by pouring over the 38th parallel. On June 27th, Warren Austin, the U.S. representative on the Security Council, proposed a resolution. The members of the United Nations furnish such assistance to the Republic of Korea as may be necessary to repel the armed attack and to restore international peace and security in the area. The resolution passed with a vote of 7-1. The Security Council meant that any member nation could now come to the assistance of South Korea, though it left unstated how the efforts of various nations could now coordinate. Just 3 days later, on June 30th, after the resolution was passed, President Harry S. Truman dispatched land, sea, and air forces to beat back on the North Korean act.
First, we will continue to uphold, when if necessary, defend with arms the principles of the United Nations. Second, we will continue to work with the other free nations to strengthen our combined defenses. Third, we will build up our own army, navy, and air force, and make more weapons for ourselves and our allies.
Our military needs to be large, and to meet them will require hard work and steady effort. I knew what was expected of me when I arrived. Colonel C. On July 7th, the Security Council recommended that all United Nations forces that were sent to Korea were to be put under United States command. A United States general, General Douglas MacArthur, was appointed the general command of all United Nations the following day. However, in April 1951, Truman relieved MacArthur of his command after he publicly threatened to bomb China in resistance of Truman's stated war policy. Truman feared that the escalation of fighting with China would draw the Soviet Union into the Korean War. By May 1951, the Communists were pushed back to 30th parallel, and the battle line remained in that area for the remainder of the war. By August, the Republic of Korea Forces, or ROK, and the United States 8th Army, which had arrived to help South Korea resist the North Korean attack, had lost a lot of ground and had been driven into a small area in the southeast corner of the Korean Peninsula around the port city of Busan. With the aid of the United States air support, additional reinforcements, and supplies, the United States and the South Korean forces barely managed to stabilize a line along the Nakdong River. The worst thing I had experienced was having to extract a young North Korean soldier from a frozen ground, Lieutenant S. In the face of fierce North Korean attacks, the Allied defense became a desperate holding action, called the Battle of Pusan Perimeter. Although more United Nations support arrived, the situation was dire for the southern government and its foreign allies, looking as though the North Koreans might succeed in gaining control of the entire peninsula. The failure of North Korea, though, to capture the city of Pusan itself ultimately doomed its invasion. The United States air power arrived in force while still holding the Pusan perimeter. In October, Chinese communist troops entered the war, throwing the Allies into a hasty retreat. The Korean conflict, after lasting 3 years, came to an end when a committee of representatives from all nations came to a compromise. This compromise is known as the Armistice Agreement. On July 27, 1953, the Armistice Agreement was signed. This agreement reestablished the 1945 division of Korea that still exists to this very day. Approximately 150,000 troops from South Korea, the United States, and participating United Nations were killed in the Korean War, and as many as 1 million South Korean civilians died. An estimated 800,000 communist soldiers were killed, and more than 200,000 North Korean civilians died. To this day, there is still conflict going on between North Korea, South Korea, the Soviet Union, and the United States. The Korean conflict was a war that never had an end.